I think this is on. Good evening, everybody. Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm so happy to see all of you. My name is Diane Williamson. I'm the Director of Community Development, and I'm joined here tonight with my staff, Ed Tanner, Principal Planner Zoning Officer, and Nick Toth, Planner and HDC Staff Assistant. He's going to be running the Zoom for us. We are recording this just to show it on our website, so people who couldn't make it tonight can still see it. And if you have any friends and family who couldn't come but want to participate in our survey, we have an online survey so that they can still feel like they're participating. So for tonight, what I should maybe back up a little bit. So the town of Bristol was fortunate to get a technical assistance grant from Rhode Island Housing to update the housing element of the town's comprehensive plan. And we have been able to, with that grant, bring on a consultant team of Horsley Witten, Jeff Davis and Ryan Mitchell, and they're going to help walk us through this update. We're also looking at programming a potential affordable housing trust fund, which is another component of the project, but not for our meeting tonight. So I'm also joined by planning board members. Jesslyn Jarrist is here, and Chuck Millard, two planning board members. Oh, and Tony Murgo to my right. How could I forget? Left and right. So they're here. They're really the ones who are going to take your feedback tonight. It will guide them on the update that they'll be presenting to the town council. Ultimately, it will have to be voted on by the town council once we get through the planning board's recommendations. So I guess without further ado, I will open it up to Jeff Davis, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane. All right, and will I just ask for next slide?
Oh, yes, yeah. We're going to
Okay.
share the PowerPoint.
All right, well, while that's coming up, just so what you can expect tonight, I'm going to try to be as brief as possible with my presentation. I've got a lot of good data for you, want to give you some context as to the town's existing housing strategies, so you can get a sense of what's on the books today. But we want to spend as much time as possible hearing from you tonight. So after my presentation, we have a series of questions that we would like to ask the group. And if we may be small enough that we can have this conversation, just all of us here in the room. If we maybe get a few more people, we can split into two groups and have that conversation. And then we want to end with an open house. So you see boards around the perimeter of the room. A lot of those boards are going to ask you to do a dot exercise and put a sticker next to the things you support, next to the things that you might support with some changes, or maybe you have some questions about a strategy, or things that you do not support. So we want to give you the time to read through those things and respond on your own. We also want to ask you for your big ideas. So things that you haven't seen today, things that you haven't heard, that you think the town should be exploring and trying. Next slide, please. Actually, we can move on to the slide after that. All right, so Diane, I thought mentioned this well in her introduction, so I'm gonna skip over this to the next slide, but yes, we are here to update the housing chapter of the comprehensive plan. And one thing to note is that this is a plan that covers not just affordable housing, but all the housing needs of the community, whether you're a senior or a young family, whether you have disabilities or other special needs, whether you're looking at market rates or affordable. We'll talk a bit more about what we mean by that in a second. Ownership, rental, all sorts of housing types, single family, apartments, two families, and so forth. Next slide, please. So what will this plan include? So basically we start with housing data and trends so that we can be basing these decisions on facts and data to the greatest extent possible. We're also going to talk about housing needs and preferences, and that's one of the reasons you're here today, to tell us what you as a community need out of the housing stock in Bristol. Then we will develop or amend the existing goals, policies, and strategies to help address those needs. And finally, there will be a section that specifically focuses on strategies that will help the town reach its 10% low to moderate income housing goal. Next slide, please. So as a start, you'll often hear affordable housing and low and moderate income housing. Want to explain from the get-go what that means, what the difference is. So when we say low and moderate income housing, or LMI housing, that refers to subsidized housing units that count towards the town's 10% requirement for affordable housing. They are de-restricted for at least 30 years, so that guarantees affordability in the long term. So throughout the evening, you'll mostly hear me saying LMI housing, and that's what I mean. When we say affordable housing, that refers to any home that is generally affordable to the occupant, whether that's market rate or owner-occupied or renter-occupied. Next slide, please. So wanted to go into some of the latest housing trends for Bristol. Next slide, please. So housing costs as a start, and this should surprise no one. As of 2022, the median single-family home was about $500,000. This was a 30% increase over just 5 years from 2017. When you look at the monthly housing payment that would require, you really need an income of just over $150,000 to afford that $500,000 home affordably. And when we say affordably, that means 30% approximately of your income. Now, as of 2022, the median household income in Bristol is about $91,000, which sounds pretty reasonable. And it is one of the higher income communities in the state. But you still have a $60,000 gap between the average income that people are making here versus the median home. And this has only gotten more pronounced in the last couple of years. As of February of this year, that median priced home that was $500,000 2 years ago is now $550,000, a 20% increase in just 2 years. Next slide, please. Similar situation with rents. The median one-bedroom rent is about $1,500. A three-bedroom is about $2,100. And good luck finding one. There's been incredible demand for rentals in the community. And if you're a single person who's looking for that one-bedroom unit in town, you need to make approximately $60,000 a year in order to, again, affordably afford that unit. Next slide, please. And just as a note, over the last few years, the increases in Bristol have been some of the highest in the state and are the highest in the East Bay. They increased 28% in 2023, and you're now in the top 10 most expensive real estate communities in Rhode Island. Next slide, please. So this is something that Diane helped me pull together. We're thinking about, all right, what does it mean to need affordable housing? What kinds of incomes are people making in the community today? So we just took several positions here at the town hall, municipal positions, ranging from the fire chief all the way down to a senior clerk. And as you can see, none of those salaries, at least on their own, could afford the median home price today. Hopefully, you've all been here a while and already have your homes. But for someone who is just moving here, taking a job here, that might be a challenge. And when we talk about LMI housing, a lot of these programs are geared towards people making 80% of the area median income or less. And 80% of that area median income here in Bristol is about $82,000 a year. So when you consider that, from your recreation director, your deputy finance director, are all making incomes that would qualify them for LMI housing. Next slide, please. So in terms of the age and condition of housing units, obviously you've got an older housing stock here, for better and worse. It makes it charming, it makes it beautiful. It's also adds to maintenance costs and complexity. So that's both a double-edged sword. Next slide, please. Also, your rental housing tends to be much older than your owner-occupied housing. About a third of owner-occupied units were built prior to 1960, and almost 2/3 of your rental-occupied units were built before 1960. So you've got an especially aging rental housing stock. Next slide. In terms of the types of housing that you have in the community, just under 2/3 are single-family homes. about 13% two-family, 7% 3 to 4 family, and 14% multifamily. And that's actually a pretty decent mix for a suburban community in Rhode Island. Compared to your neighbors, you do fairly well in that housing mix. Next slide, please. In terms of housing construction, that, like much of the state, has been very limited in the past 5 years, as few as 8 single-family homes and as many as 23. But compared to what you were seeing in the 70s, from World War II on, this is quite low, and only a handful of multifamily housing starts. Next slide. Here on this slide, I really just want to point out your owner occupancy. You've got just under 70% owner occupied, which is strong. It's stronger than the state overall, which has about 63%. But you still have a significant amount of renters. Just over 30% of residents here are renters. Next slide. Another concept that is often really helpful when we're looking at the housing needs in a community is the number of people who are cost burdened. And those are households that are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And then beyond that, when we talk about severely cost burdened households, those are households that are spending more than 50% of their income on housing. Next slide. So in Bristol, you've got over 25%, 27% of your owner-occupied units or households are spending more than that 30% of their income on their housing. Of course, much more for renter households, which is common at about 40%. And this is about on par with the state overall. It is worth noting that 14% of all households in Bristol are considered severely cost burdened. So again, 14% of households are spending more than 50% of their income on housing, which of course means they have less to spend on shops and restaurants and services and healthcare and everything else. Next slide, please. Some good news. There are some things that Bristol's doing well and are positive things to note. Your home repair program, funded by CDBG, has been a great resource for the community for years and has helped dozens and dozens of homeowners repair their homes and make those homes viable for the next generation. Next slide, please. Also, in terms of your progress on LMI housing, as of 2022, you're at 532 LMI units. About 2/3 of those are dedicated for the elderly, 20% for family, and 13% for people with special needs. And this represents about 5.73% of your total year-round units as of 2020. So you're over halfway there to that target of 10%. And compared to your neighbors, Rhode Island Housing considers Bristol to be among the communities that are making good progress from year to year. Next slide, please. In terms of housing problems, evictions have really been on the decline here, which is very good news in terms of raw numbers and in terms of per capita. Evictions have been low in Bristol County compared to the rest of the state, and in fact have decreased by 20% since 2016. Next slide, please. So that was just a very high-level look at your statistics and trends today. Wanted to next spend some time talking through your existing housing strategies, in your comprehensive plan. And staff and the planning board have gone through that list and amended it a bit. And so what we're presenting to you today is the slightly amended existing strategies. And again, one of the things we're going to ask you about today, those strategies are noted on these 3 boards here. And we want you to think about, are these worth continuing to pursue? Maybe pursue them, but with a change, or you don't think these are good ideas at all. So I wanted to give you some context before you do that exercise. I'll go through this as quickly as possible. So one, to adopt a public advertising campaign to educate residents on the need for the creation of LMI housing units. There's still a lot of misunderstanding about what that means. 2, to build an affordable housing trust fund. So this would be money that the town could invest in housing in any way it wants to, And it gives the town more control over the types of investments it makes. This is something that you have the opportunity to do. There's about $500,000 in a trust fund today. And one of the things our team will be working on beyond just this plan are strategies for the town to utilize that and perhaps turn it into a long-term tool. Next, continuing to work with Roger Williams University on more on-campus student housing so that you can free up apartments in town for other year-round residents. Or to reinstitute the Affordable Housing Committee. So the town did have an Affordable Housing Committee that built the initial housing plan in the comprehensive plan. And I think there's probably a lot of value in bringing that committee back to help usher a lot of these strategies and be a champion for some of these strategies moving forward. Next slide, please. So next, working with the Bristol Housing Authority to educate more landlords about the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. There is a lot of misunderstanding about that. So if there are more landlords in the community who might be willing to use that could be a big help for giving people access to housing that they can afford. Next, working to formalize agreements with the East Bay CDC and the Housing Network of Rhode Island. And Housing Network is with us today, Melina, who are your traditional monitoring agents for LMI housing, which is really important to make sure that these properties are managed properly and maintain affordable in the long term. Also looking to continue utilizing Roger Williams University's Community Partnership Center, which is a great resource, and they have helped the town in the past to provide strategies around LMI and affordable housing. To, of course, continue your home repair and home maintenance grant and loan program, which has been very successful. To consider better using town-owned property. There may be some town-owned property that could be appropriate for development as housing, or considering the sale of town-owned property, taking part of that proceeds and using that to reinvest in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Next slide, please. Next, there is, of course, a strong push among many municipalities across the state to lobby the General Assembly to broaden the definition of LMI housing to include more modestly priced and locally affordable units within the community. Next, to continue working with the community rating system of the National Flood Insurance Program to make sure that property owners in Bristol are receiving as many discounts as possible on their flood insurance policies. Number 12, right now, if you are the owner of a LMI property or property that's being rented out according to LMI standards, you get an 8% tax rate. A lot of property owners that are eligible for this in Bristol are not taking advantage of it. So we want to make sure that people are aware that that's an incentive, that they get that benefit. And 13, continue to identify locations where the town would like to proactively encourage the development of LMI housing. If you're familiar with the term a comprehensive permit, this is something in law where if a developer has at least 25% LMI housing within a development, they can build housing basically regardless of your zoning standards. But if a community proactively says, this is where we want to see this happen, you can partner with developers and in a more positive, friendly sense, build these units where they make most sense for the community. Next slide, please. Just a few more. 14, right now, the town sometimes will negotiate with a developer if they need zoning relief. So for example, if a development comes in and they need a variance, the town could say, all right, we'll give you this variance, but you're going to have to give us a certain number of LMI units in return. So this is something that the town could consider formalizing and making a requirement rather than simply a negotiation. 15, create an information packet for for-profit developers to help promote the creation of LMI housing. So we want, you can't just rely on the nonprofit developers. We really need the for-profit development community involved in this as well. Creating design standards for infill development. Where downtown right now, you allow multifamily housing. And we want to make sure that as that's built in these existing neighborhoods, that they're good neighbors and that they blend in stylistically with their surroundings. And then finally, making sure that the town works with local homeless agencies to track homeless individuals or family who may have resided here and may have moved elsewhere or been in shelters outside the community, and proactively try to connect them with resources and get them home. Next slide, please. So again, those are a recap of the existing strategies that the town has. There's also a set of specific strategies to get the town to its 10% LMI housing goal, and I want to briefly go over what those are today. So first off, this idea of coming up with a list of properties where you want to encourage those friendly comprehensive permits, which we've already discussed. So examples could be the Alameda Apartments that Roger Williams University currently owns, the Francis Gravel Bank at Bayview is just a couple examples. Next slide, please. Inclusionary zoning. So this is a policy that the town had until recently and rescinded last year due to changes in state law that require a certain percentage of new development, new housing that's developed to be LMI. This is something that you can consider readopting. The legislature is more than likely going to update the law related to this sometime in June. So we're all keeping a close eye on that. Similarly, accessory dwelling units. The town had assumed that a number of accessory dwelling units would be de-restricted as LMI, and that has not happened. ADUs are very popular in town, and they, I think, provide a great resource and housing alternative for a lot of people, but most homeowners don't want to put that de-restriction on a unit on their property. So it hasn't been a very good tool for building your LMI units. 4, deed restrictions in exchange for zoning relief. So we've discussed this one. Again, that's on the table and something that we can look to formalize. 5, allowing infill development on vacant lots in the R10 district in exchange for these deed restrictions. And that didn't really work because people can basically already do this anyway, according to your regulations. So there was really no incentive there. Next slide, please. Deed restricting existing housing stock in exchange for rehabilitation assistance. So this also, there's very little incentive because you're already giving these rehabilitation assistance grants out through your program, and you do not require a deed restriction in exchange. However, there are a lot of things that we'll be exploring to otherwise incentivize deed restrictions on existing housing stock. 7, buying tax sale properties. This is something that the town does now. It has primarily been for the purpose of conservation of land and not for housing. But certainly this is a strategy you could just as easily use for housing, depending on the condition of the property. 8, allowing multifamily dwellings in otherwise single-family zones in exchange for these deed restrictions. And so this is something you do today in your R15 and R20 zones. If you build you're allowed to build 2 units if one of the 2 is LMI. And then finally, mixed use commercial residential. This is another negotiating tool that when a proposal for mixed use comes up, that the town staff and boards have been able to negotiate LMI units. And again, maybe through your inclusionary zoning, you could formalize that process. All right, next slide, please. And lastly, before we break and start to hear from you, and thank you so much for your patience, I wanted to go through a few other housing strategies to consider that a number of communities in Rhode Island and around the region have been exploring as well. So one is short-term rentals, Airbnb, right? Oftentimes, if there are a lot of Airbnbs or short-term rentals in the community, that's taking away from the year-round rental housing stock. So that may be something you'll want to monitor, potentially restrict, potentially have varying tax structures for in order to incentivize more year-round rental housing. Next, taking a look at your zoning and allowing more diverse housing types in more zones. And I will say, again, compared to your neighbors, you already do a really good job at this if you look at your existing zoning map. But some other things you could consider allowing up to 4 family dwellings by right in the R8 and the R10 districts, allowing 2 family dwellings in the R15, so long as it's within walking distance of a commercial or mixed use area, or exploring zoning options for allowing clusters of small houses or cottages. So you have multiple houses on a single parcel, and that tends to be more that traditional New England style, but you're getting a denser product. Next slide, please. Another issue that we don't have a strategy for yet, but we really need to think about, and we've heard this with everyone we've talked to so far, is the need to increase senior and accessible housing. So a lot of seniors here, when they're ready to downsize and can no longer either afford to or you can't move about in their large houses, have very few options of places to downsize. So where can we build housing that they can downsize into and free up those single family homes for other families? As related to that is the issue of accessibility and the need for more housing in the community to be built with universal design so that anyone with mobility issues is able to live there and visit there. Next, consider a community housing land trust. So this is a concept where a town or a nonprofit owns the land, and the homeowner owns the home, the improvement, and that then takes the price of the land out of the total cost and reduces the price for the homeowner. Speaking of the housing network, there is an existing community housing land trust in the state that the housing network runs. So this is something that you could partner with them or consider creating one of your own. Next and last, local and regional partnerships. I think it's really important to remember that you're not alone in this. Warren and Barrington are going through this exact same process right now, and you're different in your own special ways, but you also have a lot of commonalities and a lot to learn from one another. So you don't have to do all this on your own, and I hope that you can build some partnerships through this process. All right, next slide, please. So that's the end of my spiel. How did I do on time? Not bad, not bad. I'm right about where I hope to be. So next we have 3 discussion questions, and it looks like I'm gonna take a show of hands. We can either stay all here in this room, and what I'll do is I'll ask the questions. If you can write them down on sticky notes, I can bring this board up and we can just have a conversation as a whole group. Or we do have the conference room at the front of the building set up, and we could split into 2 groups, and that would give every person more time to talk. So just a show of hands, how many people would like to just stay here as one full group? Okay, how many people would like to split into 2? Nobody. All right, unanimous. How often does that happen? Yeah, how many people don't care? All right. So, well, actually, before I do this, because there are people watching on Zoom, yes?
I think for the Zoom, we're going to be ending the recording, and we'll be posting it on our website.
All right, before we do that, I can make an announcement to the people who are on Zoom. If you could fast forward to the last slide, slide 33. Thank you. So for those of you joining us at home on Zoom, thank you. This marks the end of the formal presentation. All the information that we're going to continue discussing here in person, we have more or less built into a SurveyMonkey, and we encourage all of you to take that survey at home to tell your friends and neighbors. And that's surveymonkey.com/r/Bristol housing plan, and encourage you again to go, and you'll go through basically the same exercises online that we're going to go through in person. So again, thank you for joining us. All right. Now if you go back to slide 30. Awesome, thank you. All right. Mr. Ryan, could you pass out the sticky notes and pens for everyone? All right, I think I'm gonna pull this. Sure.
Do you want me to scribe, or do you want people to just do it on their own?